My boyfriend dismissed my miscarriage, until the EMT said, if she were mine, I'd hold her. This is a story about betrayal, unimaginable loss, and the quiet strength it takes to pick up the pieces when your world shatters. It starts with a shocking moment. I was bleeding, crying, losing our baby on the bathroom floor, but the most horrific part? My boyfriend didn't even notice until I literally crawled to him, soaking wet with blood. I was 11 weeks pregnant, and the sharp, stabbing pains had already been tearing through me for what felt like an eternity. I was curled in a fetal position, tears streaming down my face, the horrifying crimson soaking through my pajama pants. William, my boyfriend, was just a few feet away in bed, headphones on, lost in a video game on his Switch. My world was ending, but his was just mildly inconvenienced. I had to muster every ounce of strength I had, dragging myself across the cold tile floor, leaving a trail I'll never forget. I reached the bed, my arms shaking as I physically shook him. Something's wrong with the baby. I sobbed, the words ripped from my throat. He slowly pulled one earbud out, a look of annoyance twisting his face. What do you mean? He asked, as if I'd interrupted something critically important. I'm bleeding bad. I think I'm losing the baby. He sat up slowly, still annoyed. Are you sure? Maybe it's just spotting. Google says that's normal. My heart splintered into a million pieces. There I was on the bathroom floor, passing clots, feeling my body fail, and he was suggesting I Google it. He finally called 911, not because he was worried, not because he cared, but because I was being dramatic, and he wanted professionals to tell me I was overreacting. He actually said that to the dispatcher. The sheer, chilling indifference. It was a preview of the hell to come. When the EMTs arrived, William was already back in bed. They found me alone, shaking, covered in blood on the bathroom floor. The younger EMT, Diego, was immediately beside me. His voice was a lifeline, a gentle calm in the storm. Hey, I'm Diego. We're going to take care of you, okay? He asked how far along I was. 11 weeks, I whispered through fresh tears. This was our first. Diego squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of the devastation, while his partner took my vitals. I'm so sorry you're going through this, he said, his gaze searching. Is your partner here? William appeared in the doorway, fully dressed, keys jingling. I'm going to follow in my car. Hospital parking is expensive, and I might need to leave early for work. Diego looked at him like he'd grown a second head. Your girlfriend is having a miscarriage. William shrugged. Yeah, well, these things happen. First trimester and all that. Probably wasn't meant to be. I started sobbing harder, the cruelty of his words a physical blow. Diego, without a moment's hesitation, shifted his body, creating a protective barrier between me and William. Let's focus on getting you comfortable, he said to me, then to his partner. Can you grab extra blankets? She's in shock. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, Diego never let go of my hand. I know this is devastating. You're being so strong. William followed us out, complaining about having to miss his buddy's poker night tomorrow, because now we have to deal with this. He actually asked the EMTs how long miscarriages usually take because he had a conference call at 9 a.m. His total lack of empathy was a wound deeper than any physical pain. In the ambulance, Diego sat beside me, still holding my hand, while his partner drove. William, of course, had already left in his own car. Diego talked softly, not about what was happening, but about his dog, the weather, a funny call from last week. When I started crying again, he didn't tell me to stop or that everything would be okay. He just said with profound sincerity, "This is a loss. You're allowed to grieve." That simple phrase, that simple validation, meant more than he could ever know. At the hospital, William was in the waiting room on his laptop. Diego wheeled me in and stayed until they transferred me to a hospital bed. When the nurse asked if my partner wanted to come back, William said he was good where he was because the Wi-Fi was better in the waiting room. Diego, finishing his paperwork nearby, looked at William, then at me, then back at William. His jaw was tight. You know, he said, his voice carrying loud enough for the entire ER to hear, I've responded to hundreds of miscarriages. The partners usually can't let go of their girlfriend's hand. They cry together. They grieve together. William finally looked up from his screen, annoyed. Diego continued, adjusting his equipment bag. If she were mine, I'd hold her close. I'd tell her it's not her fault. I'd make sure she knew she wasn't alone in the worst moment of her life. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. But maybe I'm just old-fashioned about what love looks like. William slammed his laptop shut, his face turning crimson. Who the hell do you think you are? Diego didn't flinch. I'm the person who held your girlfriend's hand while she lost your baby. You were checking work emails. William scoffed. She's being dramatic. It's just a miscarriage. My voice, raw and broken, found its strength. Just a miscarriage? It's our baby, William. He rolled his eyes. It's not even a baby yet. It's like what, the size of a lime. Diego corrected him quietly. Raspberry. 11 weeks is about the size of a raspberry. William spun on him. How would you know that? Diego's voice, though still calm, resonated with a pain I hadn't heard before. Because I've had 3 miscarriages with my wife. I know every fruit size from blueberry to watermelon because we lost them at 8 weeks, 11 weeks, and 20 weeks. And every single time, I held her while she cried. I took time off work. I grieved with her. The entire ER had gone silent, a heavy, shocked quiet. William's face was beet red, fists clenched. Get away from my girlfriend. Diego looked at me. His eyes filled with a profound sadness. Gladly. You deserve better than someone who treats your loss like an inconvenience. That's when William fully snapped. He lunged at Diego, not caring how physically vulnerable I was, or how one wrong move could easily hurt me, or worse, further jeopardize our baby. Security guards seemed to materialize from nowhere, grabbing William's arms mid-lunge, yanking him backwards so hard he stumbled. I screamed from the hospital bed, a primal sound of shock and horror. The ER exploded into movement. Nurses swarmed my bed, someone calling for the charge nurse as my whole body shook so violently the bed rails rattled. One nurse pressed her hand to my wrist, checking my pulse, while another adjusted the blood pressure cuff that suddenly felt too tight. My heart pounded in my ears. I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't process that William had just tried to hurt someone right in front of me while I was bleeding and losing our baby. The head security guard positioned himself between William and the rest of us, his hand up in a stop gesture while his partner kept a firm grip on William's shoulder. Diego stepped back, both hands raised in a calm couch in sweatpants when the intercom buzzed. May was in the kitchen making lunch and I heard her answer it. Her voice changed immediately, going flat and firm in a way I'd never heard before. She told someone they needed to leave. My whole body went cold because I knew it was William even before she said his name. He was demanding to talk to me, his voice coming through the speaker angry and entitled, like I was being unreasonable. May repeated that I wasn't available and he needed to leave the property. She didn't yell or get emotional, just stated it like a fact. I was frozen on the couch with my heart beating so hard I thought I might throw up. William kept arguing through the intercom, saying this was ridiculous and I was being dramatic. May pressed the button one more time and said if he didn't leave, she was calling the police. Then she let go without waiting for his response. She came back into the living room and found me curled up with my knees to my chest. She sat down and pulled out her phone, opening her notes app. She typed in the date, time, and what happened, exactly like Officer Hines had told us to do. Then she asked if I was okay, and I nodded, even though I wasn't, because what else could I say? That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about William standing outside the building, about how he'd shown up like he had a right to me. I got up around 2 a.m. and found the folder the hospital advocate had given me. Inside was information about therapy and support groups, plus the intake paperwork Gardenia's office had emailed me. One section asked about coping strategies and mentioned journaling as a way to process things. I found a blank notebook in May's guest room desk and opened it to the first page. I wrote the date at the top. Then I started writing about what happened, starting with the bathroom floor and the blood and William not noticing. The words came out messy, and I had to stop 3 times to cry, but I kept going. I wrote about Diego holding my hand in the ambulance, about William trying to attack him in the ER, about losing the baby and feeling like my body had failed at the one thing it was supposed to do. When I finally stopped, my hand was cramping and I'd filled 6 pages. I felt raw and exhausted, but also like I'd let something out that had been trapped inside my chest. Tuesday came, and I took the bus to Gardenia's office in a building downtown. The waiting room had soft gray walls and plants in the corners. A woman about my age came out and introduced herself as Gardenia, shaking my hand gently. Her office had a couch and a chair, warm lighting that wasn't too bright, and a box of tissues on the side table. She told me to sit wherever I felt comfortable, and I chose the couch. Then I just started crying. I couldn't help it. She didn't try to stop me or make it better, just sat quietly and pushed the tissue box closer. After maybe 10 minutes, I managed to say I didn't know where to start. She asked what brought me here, and I told her about the miscarriage, about William's reaction, about feeling like I was drowning. She listened without interrupting, nodding sometimes, but mostly just letting me talk. When I finally ran out of words, she said something that made me feel less crazy. She said, "Losing a pregnancy isn't just losing what is. It's losing what you thought would be. All the future you'd already imagined." She said, "Grief for that is real and valid." Then she handed me a worksheet about boundaries and said we'd work on this together. Looking at the questions on the page felt both obvious and like someone had just handed me a map I didn't know existed. 2 weeks after the DNC, I went back to Dr. Steele's office for the follow-up. The nurse took my blood pressure and temperature, asked about my bleeding and pain levels. Dr. Steele came in and did a quick exam, checking that everything was healing right. She said my physical recovery was going well, that my body was doing what it needed to do. Then she asked how I was doing emotionally and if I had support. I told her about staying with May and starting therapy. She asked if I was feeling guilty about the miscarriage and I nodded because that feeling sat in my stomach all the time. Dr. Steele looked right at me and said firmly that nothing I did caused this. Not stress, not exercise, not anything. She said first trimester miscarriages usually happen because of chromosomal issues, problems that started at conception. We talked about fertility and whether I'd want to try again someday. She didn't push or make promises, just explained what the medical reality looked like. When I asked if my body would be able to carry a pregnancy in the future, she said probably yes, but there were no guarantees. I appreciated that she didn't try to make me feel better with fake reassurance. The next evening, May came into the living room where I was folding laundry and held out her phone. She had screenshot a group chat with some of our mutual friends. William had written a long message about how the pregnancy wasn't a big deal since it was so early. He said I was being dramatic about what happened at the hospital. He claimed Diego had provoked him and he'd just been defending himself. Reading his words made something shift in my chest, something that had been soft going hard. He was rewriting what happened, making himself the victim, erasing our baby like it had never mattered. I scrolled through the rest of the messages. A few people had pushed back gently, but most had just moved on to other topics. I handed the phone back to May, and she asked if I was okay. I said, "I'm done making excuses for him." And I meant it. The next morning, I called the police non-emergency line. I explained I needed to get my things from the apartment I'd shared with my ex, but I had a safety concern. The operator took my information and said someone would call me back. 3 hours later, my phone rang and it was Officer Hines. He remembered me from the ER and asked how I was doing. I told him I needed to get my documents and clothes from the apartment, but I was scared to face William alone. He said they could arrange a standby where officers would be present while I collected my belongings. We set it up for the following Tuesday afternoon. He asked if I had somewhere to store everything, and I said yes. May had space. Hanging up, I felt my hand shaking, but also felt like I was taking control of something instead of just letting things happen to me. That afternoon, my manager called. She said she'd approved extending my medical leave another 2 weeks. I felt relief flood through me because I wasn't ready to go back yet. Then she mentioned they were concerned about some project deadlines, that my absence was creating problems for the team. I apologized and she said it was fine, these things happen, but I could hear the stress in her voice. After we hung up, I sat there feeling guilty for needing time to recover, guilty for making work harder for other people. Guilty for everything. I knew logically that losing a baby and dealing with William wasn't something I chose. But knowing something logically and feeling it are different things. A few days later. In detail, like I hadn't already read the lease a dozen times. My hand shook when I signed my name on the line, removing me from the paperwork. The manager stamped the documents and handed me a copy, and I walked out knowing I'd just paid nearly a month's rent to never see William again. Back at May's apartment, I spread out my bank statements on her kitchen table and stared at the numbers until they blurred. May came home from work and found me there, pulled up a chair, and opened a budgeting app on her phone. She walked me through setting up categories for rent, food, medical bills, and eventually my own place. I watched the numbers organized into something manageable and felt proud of myself for choosing safety, even though it cost me money I didn't really have. Therapy with Gardenia the following week focused on patterns I'd been avoiding seeing. She asked me to describe a typical argument with William, and I started explaining how I'd always tried to stay calm so he wouldn't get more upset. Gardenia stopped me there and asked how often I'd minimized my own feelings to manage his emotions. I opened my mouth to defend myself and realized I'd been doing exactly that for years. She didn't make me feel stupid for staying or blame me for not seeing it sooner. She just helped me understand the pattern so I could recognize it and make different choices going forward. I left that session feeling like someone had turned on a light in a room I'd been stumbling through in the dark. The OB clinic lobby was busy when I arrived for my regular follow-up 2 weeks later. I checked in at the desk and found a seat near the window, flipping through a magazine without really reading it. Diego walked in carrying a to-go coffee cup and stopped short when he saw me. We both hesitated for a second before I stood up and crossed the small space between us. I thanked him for the kindness the EMT showed me that night, keeping it general and not making it weird. He smiled and said they were just doing their job, then mentioned his wife had an appointment here too, which explained why he was in the building. The way he said it felt natural rather than pointed, and I appreciated that he wasn't trying to be my hero or my friend. We talked for maybe 2 minutes before his wife came out of the restroom and he excused himself. I sat back down feeling okay about the encounter, like we'd acknowledged our connection without making it into something bigger than it needed to be. May helped me load the baby items into her car the next Saturday morning. I'd only bought a few things before the miscarriage. A pack of onesies and a stuffed elephant and some books I'd been excited about reading someday. We drove them to a pregnancy support organization downtown and carried the bag inside together. The volunteer at the desk thanked us and asked if we wanted a receipt for taxes, and I said no, because I didn't want documentation of this loss sitting in a file somewhere. Back at May's apartment, we lit a candle on her coffee table and sat on the couch watching it flicker. It was a small ritual that acknowledged what I'd lost without trying to make it mean something bigger than it was. May didn't say anything profound or try to find a silver lining. She just sat with me while the candle burned down, and I felt grateful she understood I needed to mark this without drama. My first day back at work was a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the miscarriage. My manager had created a ramp-up plan, starting with easier projects to rebuild my confidence. I sat at my desk opening emails and reviewing spreadsheets while my coworkers welcomed me back with careful smiles. The project I started was straightforward data entry that didn't require much creative thinking. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I felt tears building and had to lock myself in the bathroom for 5 minutes. I splashed cold water on my face and went back to my desk. At 4 o'clock, I nearly cried again when a coworker asked how I was doing in that careful tone people use when they know something bad happened. I made it through the whole day and felt a tiny bit of normalcy returning to my routine. The email from William arrived Wednesday morning from an address I didn't recognize. He asked if we could talk and complained that the protective order was making his life difficult. My hands started shaking as I read it, but I remembered the safety plan Officer Hines had helped me create. I took a screenshot of the email without responding, opened a new message to Hines, and forwarded everything with a brief note about the violation. My heart raced while I clicked send, but I also felt proud that I'd followed the plan instead of engaging with William's manipulation. HR called me in for a meeting the next day to update my emergency contacts and discuss building security. I removed William's name from every form and added May instead. The HR representative explained they were adjusting my building access badge and that security would get William's photo so they could prevent him from entering the workplace. We walked down to the security desk together where I pulled up a photo of William on my phone. The guard made a copy and added it to their system. These practical measures made me feel slightly safer, even though I hated needing them in the first place. Gardenia noted progress in our next therapy session. She pointed out that my hypervigilance was decreasing based on what I described about sleeping better and not jumping at every sound. We talked about moving to appointments every other week instead of weekly. The progress felt fragile but real, and I was learning to trust that healing didn't have to be linear to be happening. She gave me homework about identifying my needs versus others' expectations, and I left feeling like I was building something sustainable rather than just surviving. My final OB follow-up with Dr. Steele happened on a Thursday afternoon. She did an exam and reviewed my lab results, then told me everything looked good and there were no complications from the miscarriage. She cleared me medically while acknowledging that the emotional recovery would take longer than the physical healing. She asked if I had support for the grief piece, and when I mentioned therapy with Gardenia, she nodded and said that was exactly what she wanted to hear. She wished me well as I left, and I felt a chapter closing, even though I knew the story wasn't over. May's lease renewal notice came in the mail the following week. We were sitting on her couch when she opened it and mentioned she needed to decide about staying another year. I offered to increase my contribution to rent, signaling that I was planning to stay longer term rather than finding my own place right away. She accepted without making a big deal about it, and we joked about being roommates like we were in college again. Underneath the humor was the serious reality that she'd given me stability when I needed it most, and I was grateful to have a place where I felt safe while I figured out the rest of my life. Officer Hines called the following week while I was at May's apartment folding laundry. He explained that the prosecutor had reviewed William's case but decided not to file additional charges beyond the protective order violation warning. I felt my chest tighten with frustration as he talked, disappointed that William faced such limited consequences for everything he'd done. Hines walked me through the legal reality of what they could actually prove in court, explaining that emotional abuse and being a terrible partner weren't crimes, even though the hospital incident was documented. I appreciated his honesty instead of making false promises about justice, and I thanked him for following up personally when he didn't have to. He reminded me the protective order was still in place and to keep documenting any violations, then wished me well before hanging up. I sat there staring at my phone for a few minutes, processing the anger and disappointment before going back to the laundry. The pregnancy loss support group met Thursday evenings at a community center across town. I drove there the next week, walking into a room with folding chairs arranged in a circle and 8 other women already seated. The facilitator introduced herself and explained the format where we'd go around sharing our stories and feelings. I listened to the first few women talk about their losses, noticing how the structure felt too formal and the sharing too prescribed for what I needed right now. When my turn came, I gave a brief version of my miscarriage without mentioning William or the ER drama, and the facilitator asked probing questions about my support system that felt invasive. After the meeting ended, I drove home knowing I wouldn't return. Individual therapy with Gardenia was working better for me, and I didn't feel guilty about that choice because I was learning that different people heal differently. I texted May that I'd tried the group, but it wasn't my thing, and she responded with a thumbs up and no pressure. I spent Saturday morning at May's kitchen table drafting a thank you note to Diego for his compassion during the worst night of my life. I wrote and rewrote it several times, trying to express gratitude without being weird or crossing boundaries. The final version was simple, thanking him for his kindness and professional care, acknowledging how much his compassion meant during a traumatic experience. I addressed it to the hospital's general feedback system rather than trying to contact him directly, finding their online form and submitting it through proper channels. It felt important to express gratitude while respecting the boundaries he'd maintained throughout everything. I hoped he would see the feedback and know his kindness mattered, even if I never heard back. Clicking submit gave me a small sense of closure, like I'd honored something important without making it complicated. My work required CPR certification renewal, so I signed up for a public class at the community center 2 weeks later. I walked into the training room and immediately recognized Diego at the front, setting up practice dummies. My stomach flipped, but I took a seat in the back row, hoping to avoid awkward interaction. During the morning break, he approached me with a friendly smile and asked how I was doing. I told him I was managing, that I had good support and was in therapy. He nodded and said he was glad to hear it, then mentioned his wife was pregnant again, which made me genuinely happy for him. I congratulated him and asked when they were due, and we chatted briefly about his excitement mixed with normal pregnancy anxiety. The conversation felt grounded in mutual respect rather than anything complicated or charged. When the break ended, we returned to our spots, and I felt okay about the encounter, like we'd acknowledged our connection without making it into something it wasn't. My next therapy session with Gardenia focused on untangling my feelings about Diego. She helped me understand that my attraction to him was really about feeling safe and seen during trauma, not about him specifically as a person. We talked about the difference between genuine connection and trauma bonding, between real attraction and the desperate need to be rescued. She asked me to consider what Diego represented in that moment. How his basic human decency had felt like heroism because William's cruelty was my normal. Something clicked as we discussed releasing the fantasy of being rescued and building my own sense of security instead. I realized I'd stayed with William for so long, partly because I kept hoping he'd transform into someone who cared, waiting to be saved instead of saving myself. Gardenia gave me homework about identifying moments when I'd given away my power and how to reclaim it. I left the session feeling like I'd understood something fundamental about my patterns. Apartment hunting became my focus over the next few weeks. I found a small studio closer to work, nothing fancy, but clean and affordable with my own kitchen and bathroom. I used the savings I'd been keeping separate from William, plus a loan from my parents, who were relieved I was finally leaving him completely. May helped me move in on a Saturday, loading her car with my belongings from her guest room and the few things I'd retrieved from the old apartment. We made 3 trips carrying boxes up 2 flights of stairs and arranging furniture in the tiny space. Having my own place with locks only I controlled felt like reclaiming something essential about myself. May ordered pizza for dinner and we sat on my new floor eating from the box, joking about my minimalist setup. After she left, I stood in the middle of my empty studio and felt proud of myself for getting here. Closing the joint bank account with William required one last interaction through email. I logged in and saw we had one final shared bill to pay, then drafted a message about splitting it and closing everything. William responded with a dispute about who owed what, claiming I'd used more utilities the last month, which was ridiculous since I'd moved out. We went back and forth through emails for 2 days before I just paid the extra $20 myself to be done with it. The annoyance of dealing with financial loose ends was nothing compared to the relief of finally being financially separate. I transferred my half of the remaining balance, closed my access to the account, and deleted all his payment apps from my phone. Seeing those apps disappear from my screen felt like erasing another connection between us. I reactivated my social media accounts after 2 months of being offline, but I set much tighter privacy settings and made a clear policy about not discussing the miscarriage or breakup publicly. A few people immediately messaged asking what happened with William and if I was okay. I declined to answer the intrusive questions with a simple response that I was handling things privately. Some people pushed harder, wanting details or offering unsolicited advice. And I was surprised by how okay I was with disappointing their curiosity. I unfollowed anyone who made me feel obligated to explain myself and kept my feed limited to close friends and family. Being back online felt manageable now that I'd learned to protect my boundaries, even in digital spaces. The date circled on my calendar arrived in early summer. It would have been my due date. The day I would have met my baby if everything had gone differently. I took the day off work without explaining why, just marking it as personal time. I spent the morning alone in my studio, lighting the same candle I'd used before and reading the letter I'd written to the baby months ago. I let myself cry without trying to stop or analyze it. Just sitting on my floor, grieving what I'd lost. May texted around lunch to check on me, but didn't hover or demand details. Just sent a heart emoji and said she was around if I needed anything. I appreciated having space to grieve in my own way, to mark this private milestone without performance or explanation. By evening, I felt emptied out, but also lighter, like I'd honored something important. My first major project since returning to work wrapped up the following week. I'd been slowly rebuilding my confidence and workload, and this project felt like proof I could handle my job again. My manager called me in for our quarterly review meeting, and she praised the quality of my work and attention to detail. She mentioned increased responsibilities in the next quarter, potentially leading a small team on a new initiative. I felt a surge of confidence that I could handle more, that everything that had happened hadn't broken my ability to be good at my job. Walking back to my desk after the meeting, I realized I was starting to see a future again instead of just surviving each day. A thick envelope arrived at my studio apartment 3 weeks later with a law firm's return address, and I opened it standing in my kitchen to find a typed letter from William's lawyer. The apology was brief and formal, stating that William regretted the incident at the hospital and acknowledged his behavior was inappropriate during a difficult time. I read it twice, looking for anything that felt genuine, but the language was clearly drafted by his attorney to satisfy the protective order requirements rather than coming from any real remorse. The letter mentioned nothing about the baby we lost or the months of emotional neglect that led up to that night. I folded it back into the envelope and filed it in the folder with all the legal documents, feeling nothing except maybe relief that I didn't feel obligated to respond. Gardenia had talked with me about how forgiveness isn't something I owe anyone, especially not someone who hurt me and then apologized only because a judge made him. I closed the file drawer and went back to making dinner, surprised by how little the letter affected me compared to how much William's opinion used to matter. May mentioned over lunch the following week that her coworker had a friend who was recently single and wondering if I'd be interested in meeting for coffee. I felt my stomach tighten with anxiety, but also curiosity about whether I was ready to even think about dating again. May was careful not to push, saying it would just be casual and low pressure. Maybe just a chance to practice talking to someone new. I agreed mostly because I trusted May's judgment and figured I could handle one coffee without it meaning anything serious. The guy's name was Jason, and we met at a cafe near the park on a Saturday afternoon, sitting outside at a small table. He was nice enough, and we talked about work and hobbies in the city, but I kept noticing how I wasn't nervous or excited, just going through the motions of polite conversation. There was no spark or connection beyond basic friendliness, and I could tell he felt the same way. We finished our coffee after about an hour and said it was nice meeting each other, both of us clearly relieved there was no pressure to pretend otherwise. Walking back to my car, I felt okay about the whole thing instead of disappointed or worried that something was wrong with me. I was learning to trust my instincts about people and not force connections just to prove I was moving on from William. Some coffee dates are just coffee dates, and that's perfectly fine. That evening, I took out my journal from the drawer beside my bed and flipped to the letter I'd written to the baby months ago. I lit the candle I kept on my nightstand, the same one I'd used before, and sat cross-legged on my floor, reading the words I'd poured out about hopes and dreams and sorrow. The grief washed over me again, but it felt different now, less sharp and overwhelming, more like something I could hold without it destroying me. I let myself cry without trying to stop or analyze why or tell myself I should be over it by now. The tears came, and I sat with them, remembering the tiny life that had existed inside me for 11 weeks and all the future moments we'd never have together. The candle flickered in the quiet of my apartment, and I felt the weight of the loss, but also the strength of having survived it. The grief hadn't disappeared, and probably never would completely, but it had changed shape into something I could carry alongside the rest of my life instead of something that crushed me under its weight. I closed the journal and blew out the candle, feeling emptied out, but also somehow lighter. 6 months after that terrible night in the ER, I was sitting in my own apartment on a Friday evening with my laptop open, finishing up some work emails. The protective order against William was still in place with 4 months remaining, and I hadn't heard from him since his lawyer's letter. My bank account showed steady paychecks and growing savings, proof that I could manage my finances independently without anyone else controlling them. May had texted earlier asking if I wanted to grab dinner tomorrow, and I had regular therapy appointments with Gardenia every other week that helped me process everything. My manager had given me more responsibility at work, and I was handling it well. My confidence slowly rebuilding after months of feeling like I couldn't trust my own judgment. The studio apartment was small, but it was mine, with locks only I controlled and furniture I'd chosen and a safety I'd built intentionally rather than by accident. I wasn't all the way healed, and probably never would be completely, carrying the grief of losing my baby and the scars from William's treatment. But I was safe now, supported by people who actually cared about my well-being, and learning that being okay was enough to build a future on. The life I was creating wasn't perfect or dramatic or tied up with a neat bow, but it was mine. It was real. And I was finally free. Have you ever had to reclaim your life from someone who made you doubt your own reality? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.